David Chen pulled his jacket tighter against the cold air that leaked through the lower maintenance tunnels of New Horizon Station. His shift should have ended 20 minutes ago, but someone had to check the broken heating unit in Sector 7 before the night crew arrived. Nobody else volunteered, so here he was, walking through passages most people forgot existed. The tunnel smelled like old metal and recycled air. His boots echoed on the grated floor. Overhead lights flickered every few meters, casting strange shadows on the walls. David had worked at the Spaceport for 3 years now, ever since he needed a job that didn't ask questions and didn't require much talking. The other freight handlers knew to leave him alone. He showed up, did his work, and went home. Simple. Safe. That was when he heard it. At first, David thought the sound came from the heating unit itself, some new mechanical problem to add to the list. But then he heard it again, a weak cry almost like a bird but not quite. He stopped walking and listened. The sound came from deeper in the tunnel, past the cargo bay access point near the waste disposal area. David knew he should ignore it. His shift was over. Whatever made that noise was probably some animal that snuck aboard a freight ship. Security would handle it in the morning. He turned to leave, then heard the sound again. This time it was 2 voices calling to each other. Scared voices. Young voices. He swore under his breath and followed the sound. The waste disposal area was scheduled for cleaning next week, which meant it currently looked like a junk heap. Broken cargo containers stacked against the walls. Discarded packing materials scattered across the floor. The smell was worse here, a mix of chemicals and rot. David climbed over a pile of crumpled metal sheeting and found the source of the noise. 2 small creatures huddled inside an old cargo container that someone had tossed near the disposal chute. They were the size of house cats, covered in scales that might have been beautiful once but now looked dull and dirty. Wings, too small and crumpled, pressed against their sides. Their eyes were huge and golden and filled with fear. Dragons. Baby dragons. David had seen pictures in old biology databases. Back when he studied xenobiology at university before everything fell apart. These were draconids, a species so rare that most people thought they were extinct or mythical. The babies made that crying sound again, reaching toward him with tiny clawed hands. They were shivering. Their breathing looked wrong, too shallow and too fast. David should have walked away. Station protocol was clear about unauthorized life forms. He should report this to security immediately. They would handle it. It wasn't his problem. But he thought about how cold this tunnel was, how these babies were dumped here like garbage, how nobody was coming to help them. He took off his jacket and carefully picked up the first baby dragon. It was lighter than he expected, all bones under those scales. The creature made a small chirping sound and pressed against his chest, seeking warmth. The second baby crawled toward him, making the same sound. David wrapped both dragons in his jacket and checked the corridor. Empty. The security cameras in this section had been broken for months. Nobody came down here except maintenance workers. If he was quick and quiet, he could get them to his quarters without being seen. The walk back felt like it took hours. Every footstep sounded too loud. Every shadow looked like a security guard. David kept the dragons hidden against his chest, feeling their rapid heartbeats through the fabric. They had stopped crying now, but he could feel them trembling. His quarters were small and plain, 1 room with a bed, a desk, a tiny bathroom, and a food processor. The walls were bare except for 1 photograph of his wife, taken 5 years ago before the mining accident. David hadn't changed anything since he moved in. There was no point in making it feel like home. He laid the baby dragons on his bed and turned up the heat. They uncurled slowly, looking around with those huge golden eyes. One was slightly larger than the other. Both had patterns on their scales, swirls of color that might be beautiful once they were healthy. David pulled out his old university textbooks from under the bed. He hadn't looked at them in years. The pages on draconid biology were limited, mostly speculation and old research from before the species disappeared. But there were basics about their body temperature needs, their diet in early development, their growth patterns. He crushed protein pellets from his emergency rations and mixed them with water, creating a paste. The babies sniffed at it cautiously, then began to eat. They were starving. David felt anger rise in his chest. Who would abandon helpless creatures like this? Outside his viewport, fireworks began to explode in the space around the station. Colors burst against the black sky. People were celebrating the new year. counting down to midnight. David had forgotten what day it was. He watched the baby dragons eat. The larger one finished first and looked up at him, making a soft sound. Not scared anymore, almost grateful. David needed names for them. He looked at their scales. The larger one had patterns that looked like glowing embers. The smaller one had markings like dark ash. Simple names: Ember and Ash. As he cleaned them with a damp cloth, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Behind their skull ridges, barely visible under the scales, were surgical scars. Fresh scars. Precise cuts that had been sealed with medical adhesive. Someone had operated on these babies. Recently, David had seen scars like that before in his xenobiology classes. They were from extraction procedures when scientists removed specific organs or tissue samples for research. But these scars were in a strange location, right where draconid brain stems connected to their spinal columns. He pulled up his datapad and searched through restricted medical databases, using his old university credentials that somehow still worked. It took an hour of digging through files before he found what he was looking for: a classified document from a military research facility. Details about draconid anatomy, specifically about an organ called the luminal gland that produced a substance used in faster-than-light travel. The document included surgical diagrams showing the extraction procedure. The diagrams matched the scars on Ember and Ash perfectly. David sat back, feeling sick. Someone had tried to cut these babies open and harvest their organs. Someone had failed and thrown them away like trash when the procedure didn't work. Ember crawled into his lap, making a sleepy sound. Ash followed, curling up next to her sibling. Within minutes, both dragons were asleep, their breathing finally steady and calm. Outside, the fireworks continued. People cheered and laughed, celebrating a new year full of hope and possibility. David looked at the sleeping dragons in his lap, at the scars hidden under their scales, at the trust they had already placed in him. He had no idea what he was going to do. He just knew he couldn't let anyone hurt them again. Whatever it took, he would keep them safe. The new year had begun, and everything had changed. 3 weeks had passed since David found the dragons, and his life had become a careful balancing act between normal and impossible. Every morning he woke to find Ember and Ash curled around his pillow, their scales now gleaming with proper nutrition and care. They had grown noticeably larger, each now the size of a medium dog. Their wings had unfurled and strengthened, though they couldn't fly yet. Their eyes had lost that desperate, frightened look, and instead watched him with what could only be called affection. David worked his shifts at the freight docks with mechanical precision, always aware of the time, always calculating when he needed to return home to feed them. He had learned their rhythms. Ember was bolder, more curious, always trying to explore beyond the quarters. Ash was quieter, more observant, but showed remarkable problem-solving abilities when David created simple puzzles for them. That was the thing that struck him most: their intelligence. At first, David thought he was imagining it, but then Ember started opening the food storage on her own, using her claws to manipulate the latch in a way that showed understanding of cause and effect. Ash began responding to simple commands, not like a trained animal, but like someone who understood language. When David said hide, both dragons would immediately tuck themselves into the compartment under his bed. When he said quiet, they would stop making noise instantly. They were learning faster than any creature should. David spent his off hours researching, diving deeper into whatever information about draconids he could find. Most of it was surface level, tourist information from the old days when draconids were known to exist. Beautiful images of adult dragons soaring through alien skies, mentions of their role in early galactic exploration. Then nothing. The record simply stopped about 200 years ago. That silence bothered him more than anything. He needed better access to information, which meant he needed help. That was how he found himself in the lower district bar where Nina Okafor ran her side business. Nina was a data runner, someone who could access systems that were supposed to be locked. She had helped David before, back when he was desperately searching for information about his wife's death, trying to find out if the mining company had lied about the safety protocols. Nina had found the truth. The company had known about the faulty equipment and done nothing. She sat in her usual corner booth, a drink in front of her, eyes scanning her datapad. Nina looked up when David approached and smiled slightly. You only visit when you need something illegal, she said. David sat down across from her. I need access to restricted military archives. Nina's eyebrows rose. That's more than illegal. That's dangerous. What are you looking for? Information about draconids? Something shifted in Nina's expression. Recognition, maybe. Or concern. She leaned back and studied him for a long moment. Why? David had prepared for this question. He couldn't tell her the truth, not completely. Academic curiosity. I used to study xenobiology. Academic curiosity doesn't usually require military files, Nina said, but she was already typing on her pad. This is going to cost you. I know. Nina worked in silence for several minutes, her fingers moving across the screen faster than David could follow. Then she stopped and frowned. This is strange. What is? The files about draconids are heavily encrypted, more than they should be for an extinct species, and the access logs show recent activity. Someone has been looking at these files regularly. She turned the pad so David could see. Want me to crack it? Yes, it took Nina another 20 minutes. When she finally broke through the encryption, her face went pale. She read in silence, scrolling through page after page. Then she pushed the pad toward David without saying anything. David read. The first document was a historical overview from the Atheron Concordat Military Intelligence Division. It detailed the systematic hunting of draconid breeding colonies 200 years ago. The language was clinical, describing the operations as necessary containment of a resource security threat. The second document explained why. Draconids possessed an organ, the luminal gland, that produced a substance called luminal essence. This substance enabled faster-than-light travel without mechanical drives. A single adult draconid could produce enough essence to power a ship for months. The substance was incredibly valuable, incredibly rare, and could only be obtained one way: by cutting it out of living draconids. David felt his hands start to shake. He scrolled further and found technical diagrams, surgical procedures, extraction protocols. The documents described draconids not as sentient beings, but as biological resources. There were efficiency reports about how many extractions a draconid could survive before dying. There were breeding program proposals for creating captive populations. Then he found the recent files. Someone was still running a breeding program. Not officially, not through government channels, but through black market operations. The program used captured draconids or, more recently, artificially created specimens to produce luminal essence for illegal sale. The last report was dated 3 months ago. It mentioned a failed extraction attempt on 2 juvenile specimens. The subjects had survived the procedure but were deemed defective due to low essence production. Recommended disposal. David's vision blurred. Ember and ash, they weren't abandoned randomly. They were thrown away because someone tried to harvest their organs and failed. Are you okay? Nina's voice sounded distant. David looked up at her. The Atheron Concordat did this. Our allies, the species we trust to help protect Coalition space. According to these files, humans helped, Nina said quietly. She pointed at another document. Coalition forces provided support for the initial hunting operations. We were told draconids were dangerous, that they were hoarding technology that could benefit everyone. We believed it. David felt sick. His own species had helped commit genocide for profit. There's more, Nina said. She pulled up another file. This is recent. Someone named Agent Rourke is tracking escaped specimens. 2 juveniles missing from a facility on the Outer Rim 3 weeks ago. The timeline matched. Ember and Ash, he's coming here, Nina continued. His transport is scheduled to dock at New Horizon Station in 5 days. David stood up abruptly. The other patrons in the bar glanced over, then looked away when they saw his expression. I need to get them off this station, he said. Them? Nina's eyes narrowed. David, what did you find? He couldn't lie to her anymore. 2 baby dragons. In the maintenance tunnels. They have scars from extraction attempts. Nina closed her eyes and swore softly. You've been hiding them in your quarters for 3 weeks. Yes. Security is going to find them. The station does random inspections. If these dragons have luminal glands, they'll emit energy signatures. That's probably how this Rourke person is tracking them. David had suspected as much. Ember and Ash had been showing strange abilities lately. Sometimes lights would flicker when they got excited. Sometimes David could almost feel their emotions like gentle pressure against his thoughts. Can you help me? He asked. Nina looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. I know someone who might have information about where to take them. But David, you need to understand what you're doing. You're going to be a fugitive. They'll hunt you. The Concordat doesn't forgive people who steal their resources. They're not resources, David said. They're children. Nina smiled sadly. I know. That's why I'll help you. Over the next 3 days, Nina worked her contacts while David prepared. He spent every moment with Ember and Ash, teaching them more commands, helping them understand that something was about to change. They seemed to sense his anxiety. Ash would press her head against his hand, making worried sounds. Ember would bring him things, trying to comfort him in her own way. On the 4th day, Nina sent him an encrypted message with coordinates and a single word: Thornhaven. On the 5th day, station security announced mandatory quarters inspection starting the following week. Random selection. Standard procedure, they said. David knew there was no such thing as coincidence. That evening, as he packed the few belongings that mattered, his door chimed. He froze. Ember and Ash immediately scurried into their hiding spot under the bed. David opened the door. A man in expensive civilian clothes stood in the corridor, smiling pleasantly. He was tall, with gray hair and cold eyes that didn't match his smile. David Chen? The man asked. Yes? My name is Agent Rourke. I'm investigating some missing property. May I come in? David's heart hammered against his ribs. Under the bed, he could feel Ember and Ash holding perfectly still, understanding somehow that they needed to be silent. I'm sorry, David said, keeping his voice steady. I'm actually heading out. Maybe we could talk tomorrow? Rourke's smile never changed. Of course. Tomorrow, then. I'll find you. The agent walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. David closed the door and leaned against it. Tomorrow was too late. They had to leave tonight. His personal communicator buzzed. A message from Nina appeared. Dock 47, midnight, ship ready. Don't be late. David looked at the chronometer on his wall. 6 hours until midnight. 6 hours to escape or lose everything. Dock 47 occupied the oldest section of New Horizon Station, where the original construction crews had built the first landing platforms decades ago. Most freight operations had moved to the newer automated docks, leaving this area quiet and dimly lit, perfect for people who wanted privacy. David carried a single bag over his shoulder and a cargo container in his arms. Inside the container, wrapped in thermal blankets, Ember and Ash stayed silent. He had explained to them what was happening, speaking in simple words and gentle tones. Whether they truly understood or simply trusted him, both dragons had remained calm and quiet during the walk from his quarters. The chronometer on his wrist showed 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes early. Dock 47 appeared empty at first. The landing platform stretched out before him, scarred metal under harsh overhead lights. An old transport ship sat at the far end, its hull patched in multiple places and its registry numbers faded almost to nothing. Not the kind of ship that would attract attention. Then a woman stepped out from behind a support column. She was older than David, perhaps in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical braid. She wore a medical coat over standard civilian clothes, and her eyes had the sharp, assessing look of someone who saw more than most people. David Chen, she said. It wasn't a question. Who are you? My name is Iris Yamada. Nina told me you would be here. She gestured toward the cargo container. May I see them? David hesitated. He knew nothing about this woman. But Nina had sent him here, and he was out of options. He set down the container and opened it carefully. Ember and Ash looked up at the stranger with cautious golden eyes. Iris drew in a sharp breath. She knelt beside the container and extended her hand slowly, letting the dragon sniff her. Ember chirped and nudged her palm. Ash watched but didn't retreat. They're beautiful, Iris whispered. Then she saw the scars. Her expression changed to something like pain. Oh no, they tried extraction on babies this young? You know about the extraction procedures, David said. Iris stood and met his eyes. I know because I used to perform them. David's hand moved instinctively to the container, ready to grab the dragons and run. Wait, Iris said quickly. Please let me explain. I'm not here to hurt them. I'm here to help. That's why I contacted Nina. That's why I've been watching the station's medical reports looking for signs of Draconid life signatures. You were looking for them? I've been looking for any Draconid for 10 years, Iris said. Ever since I left the Concordat research program, ever since I understood what we were really doing. She gestured toward a bench near the ship. We don't have much time, but you deserve to know who I am before you trust me with their lives. David picked up the container and followed her. Ember made a questioning sound, but he murmured reassurance and she settled down. Iris sat and began to speak. Her voice steady but filled with regret. 30 years ago, I was recruited by the Atheron Concordat to work in xenobiology research. They told me I would be studying rare species, helping to preserve genetic diversity, contributing to galactic knowledge. I believed them. I wanted to help. She looked down at her hands. They assigned me to a facility on a moon at the edge of Concordat space. When I arrived, I discovered the truth. We weren't preserving anything. We were harvesting luminal essence from captured draconids, adults mostly, but sometimes juveniles. The work was classified as critical to Concordat security. How could you do it? David asked. At first, I told myself it was necessary. The Concordat told us that draconids were dangerous, that they had attacked human colonies, that this was justified. They showed us reports of draconid aggression. They made us believe we were protecting people. Iris's voice became quieter. But I worked with them every day. I saw how intelligent they were, how they tried to communicate even in captivity, how they grieved when we separated families. One day I was assigned to extract essence from a female who had just laid eggs. She fought us not to escape but to protect her nest. We had to sedate her heavily. When she woke up after the procedure and saw that her eggs were gone, she made a sound I still hear in my nightmares. David felt cold. What happened to the eggs? Destroyed. The program only wanted adult draconids at that time, because their glands were fully developed. Juveniles weren't cost-effective. Iris looked at Ember and Ash. That policy changed about 15 years ago when someone realized they could breed draconids in captivity, create a sustainable supply. The black market program, David said. You've done research. Iris nodded approvingly. Yes. When the official Concordat program ended after the draconid population collapsed, private operators continued the work. They're more brutal than we ever were. At least in the official program, we tried to keep subjects alive for multiple extractions. The black market operators don't care. They extract everything and dispose of the bodies. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what we're up against. And because I need you to know that I'm not the person I was. That day, when I heard that mother dragon's grief, something broke inside me. I started sabotaging the procedures. Small mistakes that meant subjects died during extraction instead of surviving for more harvesting. I made it look like accidents. Equipment failures, contamination. Iris met his eyes. When the program finally shut down, I took all the research data I could carry and disappeared. I've spent the last decade trying to find surviving draconids and help them reach safety. There's a sanctuary, a hidden world called Thornhaven. Several species protected together. Draconids who escaped the genocide live there, along with others who rejected what the Concordat did. Nina mentioned Thornhaven. David said, You have the coordinates? I do, but there's a problem. I don't have a ship capable of making the journey undetected. The route requires passing through 3 Concordat checkpoint systems. Any ship I could afford would be flagged and searched. David thought about this. I have freight clearance codes, old ones from my work. Ships carrying registered cargo don't get searched as thoroughly. Can you pilot? Basic navigation. Enough to follow a set course. Iris smiled for the first time. Then we might have a chance. But you need to know that Agent Rourke arrived at the station 2 hours ago. He's already questioning dock workers. He's good at his job, David, very good. He won't stop until he finds these dragons or confirms they're dead. How do you know about Rourke? Because he was my supervisor at the research facility. He's the one who designed the extraction procedures. He's the one who convinced the Concordat that draconids were resources, not people. And he's the one who's been running the black market program since the official operations ended. David felt anger rising in his chest. He did this to them. He gestured at Ember and Ash. He did worse to countless others. But he's also smart and connected and ruthless. If we're going to get past him, we need a plan. They spent the next hour working out details. Iris had access to medical shipping containers that were rarely inspected. David's freight codes would allow them to register as a medical supply transport. The ship at Dock 47 belonged to a friend of Nina's who owed her favors and asked no questions. Ember and Ash would travel in the modified medical containers with life support and thermal regulation. The containers would be listed as biological samples being transferred to a research facility. Not unusual. Not worth investigating. The tricky part is getting to the ship without being seen, Iris said. Rourke will have people watching the main corridors. He might even be monitoring power signatures, looking for luminal energy. As if responding to her words, the lights above them flickered. Ember's scales were glowing faintly, a soft amber light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. David touched her head gently. You need to stay calm, little one. I know you're scared, but we need to be invisible right now. The glow faded slowly. Ash pressed against her sibling, and David felt a strange sensation, like a gentle touch inside his mind. Comfort, reassurance. The dragons were trying to soothe each other. They're developing psychic abilities, Iris said with wonder. Earlier than they should. Stress might be accelerating their growth. Is that going to be a problem? It might help us. Draconid's psychic abilities include a form of camouflage. If they can learn to suppress their energy signature, Rourke's sensors won't detect them. Iris knelt beside the container again and spoke directly to the dragons, her voice soft and musical. She used words David didn't recognize, a language that sounded like wind chimes and distant thunder. Ember and Ash tilted their heads, listening intently. Then Ash responded, mimicking some of the sounds. You speak their language? David asked. I learned it at the facility. We needed to give them commands during procedures. But draconids also use it to communicate with each other. These two have been learning from instinct, but they need proper instruction. Iris smiled at Ash. She's very clever. She understood what I asked. What did you ask? I asked them to imagine themselves as shadows, to think about darkness and silence. It's how draconids teach their young to hide from predators. Both dragons closed their eyes. The faint glow of their scales dimmed until they looked almost black in the shadows. Even their breathing seemed to quiet. Remarkable, Iris breathed. A sound echoed from the corridor leading to the dock. Footsteps. Multiple people. Security patrol, David said. They do sweeps every hour. We need to board now, Iris said. Help me get them into the proper containers. They moved quickly, transferring Ember and Ash into the medical shipping containers Iris had prepared. The dragons cooperated, seeming to understand the urgency. Within minutes, both containers were sealed and loaded onto the ship. The security patrol appeared at the entrance to the dock. 3 guards doing their routine check. One of them saw David and Iris and called out, "Dock's closed for the night." "What are you doing here?" Iris stepped forward, projecting calm authority. "Medical transport. We have clearance for a priority shipment to Research Station Gamma." She held up her credentials. David did the same with his freight authorization. The lead guard checked their documentation on his scanner. He frowned. "These are last-minute filings. Why wasn't this scheduled in advance?" "Because the samples are time-sensitive biological materials that will degrade if we wait," Iris said smoothly. "Check with medical administration if you want, but every minute we delay reduces their viability." The guard clearly didn't want that kind of responsibility.
He handed back their credentials.
"Fine, but you launch within 20 minutes or I'm reporting this." "Understood." The patrol left. David and Iris looked at each other. "That was close," David said. "It's going to get closer. Let's move." They boarded the ship and began final preparations. The vessel was old but well-maintained, its systems humming to life as David powered up the engines. Iris checked the cargo hold where Ember and Ash waited in their containers. As David began the launch sequence, his communicator buzzed. A message from an unknown sender appeared on the screen. "I know what you're hiding, David Chen. I'm willing to make you an offer. Meet me at Observation Deck 3 in 1 hour, or I'll notify security about the unauthorized lifeforms in your cargo." The message was signed simply, Rourke. David showed it to Iris. She went pale. "He's bluffing," she said. "He can't know for certain. Can we risk it?" They looked at each other, both knowing the answer. They couldn't run if Rourke alerted station security. The ship would be locked down before they cleared the dock. "I'll go," David said. "You stay with the ship and the dragons. If I'm not back in 90 minutes, launch without me." "David, if he wanted them dead, he wouldn't offer to talk. He wants something. Maybe I can buy us time." Iris looked like she wanted to argue, but she nodded. "Be careful. Rourke doesn't make offers without having all the advantages." David left the ship and made his way to Observation Deck 3, his mind racing with possibilities, all of them bad. The deck was empty when he arrived. just curved windows looking out at the star field and the distant planet below. Then Rourke stepped out of the shadows, still wearing that pleasant smile that never reached his eyes. "Thank you for coming," Rourke said. "I think we can help each other." Rourke walked slowly along the observation windows, hands clasped behind his back like a professor giving a lecture. The stars beyond cast his face in pale light. "You're wondering how I found you," Rourke said. "It's quite simple, really. The dragons emit a unique energy signature, faint but detectable with the right equipment. I've been tracking it since I arrived at the station. When the signature moved from residential quarters to Dock 47, I knew my property was about to leave." David forced himself to stay calm. "They're not property. Legally, they are. Those specimens were created in a licensed breeding facility. Their genetic code is patented. Every cell in their bodies belongs to people who invested considerable resources in their development." "You mean the people who tried to cut them open?" Rourke turned and smiled. The extraction procedure was performed within standard protocols. The subjects survived, which proves adequate care was taken. The fact that they proved defective is unfortunate, but that's why we have quality control measures. David felt rage building inside him, but he kept his voice level. "What do you want, Rourke?" "I want to make you rich." Rourke pulled out a data pad and displayed a number. "This is what I'm authorized to offer you for the safe return of the specimens. Enough money to never work another day in your life. Enough to retire anywhere in Coalition space and live in comfort." The number was staggering, more than David would earn in 50 years of freight handling. "And if I refuse?" David asked. "Then I alert station security that you're harboring stolen biological materials. You'll be arrested. The specimens will be confiscated and returned to their rightful owners. You'll spend the next decade in prison." Rourke's smile didn't waver. "Or you could take the money and walk away. Simple choice. Why offer me anything? You could just take them. Because I prefer simple solutions. If I involve security, there will be reports, documentation, witnesses. The program I represent values discretion. A quiet transaction benefits everyone." David thought about Ember and Ash waiting in their containers on the ship. He thought about their intelligence, their trust, the way they had pressed against him for comfort when they were frightened. "No," David said. Rourke's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I'm offering you wealth beyond your dreams." "I don't care. Then you're a fool." Rourke tapped his communicator. "Security, this is Agent Rourke, Concordant Intelligence. I need an immediate lockdown of Dock 47. Unauthorized biological materials are being smuggled." David hit him. He had never punched anyone in his life. His technique was terrible, his form was wrong. But desperation and anger gave the blow enough force to snap Rourke's head back and send him stumbling. Rourke touched his split lip, looking genuinely surprised. Then he laughed. That was monumentally stupid. Alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed in the corridors. Rourke's security call had gone through. David ran. He sprinted through the corridors toward Dock 47, dodging startled workers and confused travelers. Behind him, he heard shouting as security forces mobilized. The station's AI announced in calm tones that all docks were entering temporary lockdown for a security inspection. David's communicator buzzed. Iris's voice came through tight with stress. "I heard the alarms." "What happened?" Rourke called security. "We're out of time. Start launch procedures. They'll shoot us down. Then we better move fast." David burst onto Dock 47 to find chaos. Security forces were already moving into position around the landing platforms. The ship's engines were warming up, a low rumble that vibrated through the deck. Iris stood at the ship's ramp, waving frantically. "Come on!" David ran toward her. A security guard stepped into his path, reaching for his weapon. David didn't slow down. He lowered his shoulder and collided with the guard, sending them both crashing to the deck. David scrambled to his feet and kept running. Stun blasts sizzled past him. One hit the deck near his feet, sending up sparks. He dove through the ship's entrance and Iris slammed the hatch control. "Get us in the air," she shouted. David threw himself into the pilot's seat. His hands moved across the controls, pulling up the launch sequence he had practiced 100 times in training simulations years ago. The ship shuddered as it lifted off the deck. Warning lights flashed across his console. Station control was trying to override his systems, lock down his engines. David switched to manual control and pushed the throttle forward. The ship lurched upward, scraping against the dock's overhead structure with a screech of metal. Sparks showered around them. David compensated, angling toward the open space beyond the station. "They're targeting us," Iris said, watching her sensor display. 3 security ships launching from the military dock. David pushed the engines harder. The old transport rattled and groaned but responded, accelerating away from the station. Space opened up before them, vast and black and full of possibilities. Then the weapons fire began. Warning shots at first. Bright streaks of energy that crossed their bow. David jinked left then right, using every evasive maneuver he could remember. The transport wasn't built for this kind of flying. Every sharp turn threatened to tear the hull apart. "They're not trying to destroy us," Iris said. "They want us disabled." That's not much better. A blast hit their rear shield, sending power fluctuations rippling through the ship. Lights flickered. The engine pitch changed, becoming rougher. In the cargo hold, David heard the dragons crying out in fear. "It's okay," he shouted toward the hold. "We're going to make it." Another hit, this one closer to the engines. The ship's AI began listing damage reports in a calm, almost cheerful voice that was completely at odds with their situation. "I'm initiating FTL jump," David said. He pulled up the coordinates Iris had given him and fed them into the navigation system. "We're too close to the station," Iris protested. "Jumping from this distance violates every safety protocol. We don't have a choice." The pursuing security ships closed in, their weapons charging for another volley. This time they weren't firing warning shots. David could see the energy signatures building. Weapons hot and ready to disable their engines permanently. He initiated the jump. The universe twisted. Jumping to FTL this close to a major gravitational source was dangerous for good reasons. The ship's structure groaned as it was pulled in multiple directions at once. Alarms shrieked. Systems began failing across the board. Then they were through, streaking into faster-than-light space, leaving New Horizons Station and the security ships far behind. David slumped in his seat, his hands shaking on the controls. They had made it. Somehow, impossibly, they had escaped. Iris put a hand on his shoulder. "That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Probably both." A sound from the cargo hold made them both turn. Ember and Ash had broken free from their containers. The dragons stood in the doorway, their scales glowing with agitation, their eyes wide. "It's okay," David said softly. "We're safe now." Ember chirped and bounded toward him, climbing into his lap despite being far too large for it. Ash followed more cautiously, pressing against Iris's legs. Iris knelt and stroked Ash's head, speaking in that musical Draconid language. The dragon's glow began to fade as she calmed. "They were terrified," Iris said. "They thought they were being abandoned again." David wrapped his arms around Ember, feeling her rapid heartbeat against his chest. "Never, I promise, little one." Never again. But even as he made the promise, he knew their troubles were far from over. He checked the navigation display. They were on course for Thornhaven, but the journey would take 3 days. 3 days in a damaged ship with limited supplies and every authority in Coalition space looking for them. "We need to assess the damage," Iris said, moving to check the ship's systems. Her expression grew grim as she read the reports. Multiple hull breaches sealed by emergency patches. Life support operating at 60%. Main engines damaged but functional. Shield generators offline. "Can we make it to Thornhaven?" "If nothing else goes wrong, yes. But if we encounter any concordant patrols, we have no shields and our weapon systems never worked to begin with." David looked at the stars streaming past the viewport, endless and indifferent. Somewhere behind them, Rourke would be organizing a pursuit. Somewhere ahead, Thornhaven waited. A sanctuary he had never seen and wasn't entirely sure existed. But he had 2 baby dragons sleeping in his lap, trusting him to keep them safe. That had to be enough. "Get some rest," he told Iris. "I'll take first watch. Wake me if anything happens." "I will." Iris retreated to the small cabin at the rear of the ship. David sat alone in the pilot's seat with Ember and Ash, watching the stars blur past and trying not to think about everything that could still go wrong. Hours passed in tense silence. The ship's systems held together through sheer stubbornness. David dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every unusual sound or fluctuation in the engine rhythm. On the second day, Ember began showing him images through their psychic connection. Fragmentary memories, confused and painful. A larger dragon, scales the color of sunset, breathing fire that didn't burn. Her mother, David realized. Gentle claws lifting her and Ash, keeping them warm. Then the memory shifted. Cold metal. Bright lights, pain that made the image fracture and dissolve. David held her close and whispered promises he hoped he could keep. By the third day, exhaustion had caught up with all of them. David and Iris took turns sleeping in short shifts. The dragons remained close, their presence a constant reminder of why they were risking everything. The navigation system chimed. They were approaching the coordinates for Thornhaven. David pulled out of FTL and stared at the view screen. A planet hung before them, beautiful beyond words. Crystalline forests caught the light of 3 moons and scattered it in rainbow patterns. Floating islands drifted through the upper atmosphere, connected by bridges of what looked like living vines. Ancient structures rose from the surface, organic and technological at once, as if they had been grown rather than built. "It's real," Iris breathed. "I was never entirely sure, but it's real." Before David could respond, multiple ships appeared on their sensors, sleek vessels that moved with predatory grace, taking up positions around the damaged transport. A communication request appeared on the display. David accepted it. The screen showed a draconid, fully grown and magnificent. Their scales shifted between silver and blue. Their eyes were ancient and knowing. "You carry children of our kind," the draconid said, their voice resonating with harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. "State your intentions." David looked at Ember and Ash, both watching the screen with wide eyes. Then he looked back at the draconid. "I'm bringing them home," he said simply. "I'm bringing them to safety." The draconid studied him for a long moment. Then they smiled, showing rows of elegant teeth. "Welcome to Thornhaven, Protector. We have been waiting for you." The landing platform was carved from living crystal that pulsed with soft light. David guided their damaged ship down with careful precision, aware of dozens of eyes watching from the platforms and floating islands above. When the engines finally powered down, the silence felt profound. Ember and Ash pressed against the viewport, making excited sounds as they saw other draconids moving through the crystalline structures. Some flew overhead, their wings catching the light like stained glass. Others walked on pathways that seemed to grow from the ground as they approached. "I've never seen so many," Iris whispered. "I thought there were maybe a few dozen left in the entire galaxy." The elder draconid from the communication screen waited at the base of the landing ramp. Up close they were even more impressive. Nearly 3 meters tall when standing upright, their presence radiated calm authority. "I am Elder Sienna," they said as David and Iris descended the ramp. "I speak for the Sanctuary Council. You have taken great risks to bring our children home." "They were dying," David said. "I couldn't leave them." Elder Sienna's gaze shifted to the ship's entrance where Ember and Ash had appeared. Both baby dragons hesitated, overwhelmed by the presence of an adult of their kind. Sienna lowered herself to the ground and spoke in the musical draconid language, her tone gentle and welcoming. Ember took a tentative step forward, then another. Ash followed close behind. When they reached Sienna, she wrapped her wings around them both. The sound Ember and Ash made was pure relief, a harmony of chirps and trills that spoke of safety finally found. Other young draconids appeared from the nearby structures, approaching cautiously but with clear curiosity. David felt something break loose in his chest. The dragons didn't need him anymore. They had found their people, their true home. Sienna looked up at him and somehow he understood that she sensed his thoughts. "They will always need you, David Chen. You gave them something precious when they had nothing. That bond does not break simply because they have found more of their kind." Iris stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Elder Sienna, I must confess something. I worked for the extraction program. I hurt your people. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know before you granted us sanctuary." Sienna regarded her for a long moment. "We know who you are, Iris Yamada. We know what you did and we know how you tried to make amends. Redemption is not granted by others. It is earned through action and carried in the heart. You have already begun your journey." Tears ran down Iris's face. She nodded, unable to speak. "Come," Sienna said. "There is much you need to understand. The archive holds our history, and you have earned the right to see the truth that others tried to bury." They followed Sienna through paths that wound between crystal formations and living structures. Other species lived here too, David realized. Beings he didn't recognize, some humanoid and others decidedly not. All of them watched the humans with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. The archive was housed in a structure that seemed to be made of fossilized light. Inside, the walls displayed moving images, responding to Sienna's presence by showing different scenes from history. What you are about to see has been hidden from most of the galaxy for 300 years, Sienna said. The truth of what we were, what we offered, and what was taken from us. The walls showed space, beautiful and vast. Then ships appeared, elegant vessels that moved like living things. Draconids flew between stars without ships, their bodies wreathed in glowing energy. We were the first to achieve faster-than-light travel, Sienna explained. Not through machines, but through our connection to the fabric of space itself. The luminal gland in our bodies allows us to perceive and navigate the currents of reality that others cannot see. The images shifted, showing draconids meeting other species. Humans appeared in the display, their early ships primitive and struggling. A draconid approached them, communicating through gestures and psychic impressions. We found humanity 300 years ago, Sienna continued. You were brave and curious but trapped in your own solar system. Your ships were slow. You dreamed of the stars but couldn't reach them. So we helped. The display showed draconids working with human scientists, not as subjects in experiments but as teachers and partners. They shared knowledge freely, showing humans how to build drives that could interact with the luminal fields they generated. We gave humanity the stars, Sienna said quietly. We asked nothing in return except friendship. David felt something cold forming in his stomach. What happened? The Atheron Concordat happened. The images changed, showing a different species, tall and elegant with skin that shimmered like oil on water. The Atheroni had their own ships, their own technology, and their own ambitions. The Atheroni had achieved FTL through different means, Sienna said. Mechanical drives that were expensive and difficult to maintain. When they discovered that humans had partnered with us, they saw a threat to their technological supremacy. If every species could travel freely with draconid assistance, Atheron influence would diminish. The display showed Atheroni diplomats meeting with human leaders. Documents appeared written in human languages. Official reports, intelligence briefings, all of them painting draconids as dangerous, unpredictable, potentially hostile. They convinced your leaders that we were hoarding technology, Sienna said. That we were keeping secrets that could save human lives. That we posed a security risk because we couldn't be controlled. David watched as the images showed human attitudes shifting. Fear replaced friendship. Military forces mobilized. Research facilities were built. Then the hunting began. The display didn't spare any details. Human and Atheron ships working together, tracking draconid breeding colonies. Attacks on settlements where draconids lived peacefully with other species. Captures, experiments, extractions. They told you that we attacked first, Sienna said, that we were aggressive and needed to be contained. But we never raised a claw against humanity until we were forced to defend ourselves. By then, it was too late. The images showed draconids fighting back, using their psychic abilities and their command of luminal fields to defend their homes. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and unprepared for systematic genocide. 200 years ago, there were millions of us, Sienna said. We lived on dozens of worlds, helping dozens of species reach the stars. Now there are fewer than 3,000. We survived only by hiding, by abandoning our homes and our purpose. The display shifted again, showing the extraction program in clinical detail. Draconids restrained on surgical tables. The luminal gland being removed with precise instruments. Some subjects survived. Most didn't. David turned away, unable to watch. He had known this intellectually, from the files Nina had found. But seeing it, watching members of Sienna's species being butchered for profit made it visceral and real. The Concordat told everyone that draconids went extinct because we were too fragile, too specialized, Sienna said. They built monuments to our memory. They expressed regret at the loss of a unique species. And all the while they continued running secret extraction programs using the last of us as resources. Iris was crying openly now. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Your sorrow is noted, Sienna said gently. But the weight you carry belongs to all of humanity, not just to you. Every human who uses FTL technology built on stolen draconid knowledge shares in this debt. David found his voice. Why didn't anyone speak up? Why didn't other species stop this? Some tried. Those who succeeded created this sanctuary. But most species believed the Concordat's version of events. They saw the evidence of draconid aggression that the Atheroni fabricated. They heard stories of attacks that never happened. And when draconids disappeared, they mourned briefly and moved on, grateful for the technology we left behind. The display showed one final image, a document written in human and Atheron languages dated 15 years ago, a proposal for breeding programs to create sustainable draconid populations for essence harvesting. This is what they reduced us to, Sienna said. Not people, not friends, not teachers. Resources to be managed and exploited. David thought about Ember and Ash, about the scars behind their skull ridges, about how close they had come to being nothing more than sources of biological material. I didn't know, he said. Humans don't know. If they knew the truth, would it matter? Sienna asked. The truth has always been available to those who looked. The evidence exists in archives and historical records, but it's easier to believe the comfortable lie than the painful truth. Easier to use the technology without asking where it came from. David felt something crumbling inside him. His entire species built on genocide and lies. Every ship he had ever loaded, every journey he had taken, made possible by stolen knowledge and harvested organs. I can't fix this, he said. I can't make it right. No, Sienna agreed. You cannot. But you can choose what comes next. That is the gift and burden of being human. You have agency. You have the power to choose differently. Through the psychic bond, David felt Ember and Ash nearby. They had been listening somehow, understanding more than he expected. Their presence in his mind was warm and accepting. They didn't hate him for what his species had done. That made it worse somehow. Why don't you hate us? David asked. Why did you let us into your sanctuary? We destroyed you. Sienna was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was sad but not bitter. Because hatred is a poison that harms the one who carries it more than the target. Because you, David Chen, saw 2 dying children, and chose to save them even though you had every reason to walk away. Because Iris Yamada chose redemption over comfort. Because humanity is capable of great evil but also great good. The question is which you choose to nurture. She gestured toward the archive walls which now showed images of the sanctuary, draconids and other species living together, teaching and learning, building something new. We are not trying to return to what was, Sienna said. That world is gone, destroyed by fear and greed. We are trying to create what could be, a galaxy where knowledge is shared freely, where species help each other reach higher, where children like Ember and Ash grow up safe and valued. What can I do? David asked. That is for you to decide. But first you should rest. You have traveled far and risked much. The future can wait a few hours. Sienna led them to quarters carved from the same living crystal as the archive, comfortable, warm, with viewports that looked out over the impossible beauty of Thornhaven. Ember and Ash refused to leave David's side. They curled around him as he lay down, their presence a comfort and a reminder. Iris sat by the viewport, staring out at the floating islands and crystalline forests. I spent 10 years trying to make amends, she said quietly. I thought if I saved enough draconids, if I worked hard enough, I could balance the scales. But there is no balance, is there? Nothing I do will bring back the ones I killed. Sienna said redemption is earned through action, David said. Maybe it's not about balancing scales. Maybe it's just about choosing to be better every day. Is that enough? I don't know. But it has to be worth something. They sat in silence as the alien sun set over Thornhaven, painting the crystal formations in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere in the sanctuary, young draconids played together, learning to fly under the watchful eyes of elders. Somewhere in Coalition space, the hunt for stolen property continued. And somewhere between those two realities, David Chen and Iris Yamada faced a simple question. What came next? David woke to the sound of alarms. Not the harsh klaxons of the station, but melodic tones that resonated through the crystal structures. Ember and Ash were already awake, their scales glowing with agitation. Through the viewport, he could see activity throughout the sanctuary. Draconids taking to the air, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Iris appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Ships just emerged from FTL at the system's edge. Multiple concordant signatures. Rourke found us, David's stomach dropped. He had known pursuit was inevitable, but he had hoped for more time. He rushed to the window and saw the defensive preparations happening throughout Thornhaven. Ancient weapon systems were powering up, their crystalline structures beginning to glow. Elder Sienna entered the room with urgent grace. The Concordat fleet is demanding our surrender. They claim we are harboring stolen property and fugitives. They have given us 1 hour to comply or face military action. How many ships? David asked. 17. including 3 heavy cruisers. Sienna's expression was troubled. We have defensive capabilities, weapons left by our ancestors when Thornhaven was first established as a refuge. We could destroy their fleet. Then do it, Iris said. If we do, the battle will be visible across half the sector. Every faction with sensors will know Thornhaven's location. We will become a target for everyone who wants to exploit Draconid knowledge. The sanctuary will fall. Perhaps not today, but eventually. David understood the impossible position. Fight and lose everything slowly, or surrender and lose everything immediately. There has to be another option, he said. Sienna looked at him with ancient, knowing eyes. There is. We could tell the truth, all of it. Broadcast our history, the evidence of the genocide, the extraction programs, everything to every system in Coalition space. Make it impossible for the Concordat to hide what they have done. Would it work? Iris asked. I don't know. Humans are capable of extraordinary self-deception when confronted with uncomfortable truths. But they are also capable of moral courage when they understand the stakes. The question is whether enough of them will choose courage over convenience. David thought about his own journey. He had lived his entire life using technology built on genocide without questioning where it came from. He had accepted the official story because it was easier than seeking the truth. How many other humans were like him? But he had also chosen to save Ember and Ash when he could have walked away. That had to mean something. We need to reach Nina, he said suddenly. She helped us escape the station. She knows how to access communication networks. If anyone can broadcast this across Coalition space, she can. Your friend was arrested, Sienna said gently. Concordat security took her into custody after your escape. David's heart sank. Then his communicator buzzed. Impossible. They were too far from any network. But the message came through anyway, crackling with interference. David, it's Nina. If you're getting this, my automated systems managed to bounce this signal through about 50 relays. Listen carefully because I'm almost out of time. The message was choppy, fragments separated by static. After you left, some Coalition officers started asking questions. Not about you, about Concordat activities on the station. Turns out not everyone is comfortable with black market extraction programs. They helped me escape custody. I'm with a group of sympathizers now. We've been gathering evidence, preparing for this. More static. Then Nina's voice came back stronger. I don't know if you made it to Thornhaven, but if you did, and if you have access to the archive, we can help. Send us everything. The whole history. We have access to the emergency broadcast system. Every screen in Coalition space. We can show them the truth, but only if you trust us with it. The message included coordinates for a secure data upload. David looked at Sienna. Can we do it? The archive contains information that could be weaponized against us, Sienna said slowly. Details about our biology, our abilities, our weaknesses. If this information falls into the wrong hands, it could mean the final extinction of our species. But if it works, Iris said, it could mean freedom. No more hiding. No more hunting. Sienna closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked older than the stars. The council must decide. But we have less than an hour. The council gathered in a chamber that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially somewhere else. 20 elder draconids, representatives of the last breeding colonies, guardians of knowledge that dated back millennia. David and Iris stood before them, 2 humans asking an entire species to risk everything on hope. David spoke without preparation, from his heart. I can't promise this will work. I can't promise humans will choose to be better. But I know that we can't keep hiding from the truth. Not you and not us. Humanity needs to face what we've done. We need to see the cost of our comfort. If we don't, nothing changes. The hunting continues. The genocide continues. And eventually there won't be any draconids left to save. He thought about Ember and Ash, about the future they deserved. You gave us the stars 300 years ago. You asked nothing in return except friendship, and we betrayed you. I can't fix that. But maybe I can help ensure we never forget. That we never get to pretend we didn't know. One of the elders spoke, their voice like distant thunder. And if humanity sees the truth and chooses to do nothing? Then at least we tried, David said. At least we gave them the chance to be better. The council deliberated in their musical language, voices harmonizing and diverging in patterns David couldn't follow. Finally, Elder Sienna spoke. We will share the archive, all of it, but we make one demand. If humanity wants to continue using the technology we gave them, they must earn it. No more secrets, no more extraction, partnership or nothing. David nodded. I'll make sure they understand. The next 40 minutes were a blur of activity. The archive opened itself completely. Thousands of years of history and knowledge flowing into data streams. Nina's team received the upload and began integrating it into their broadcast system. Overhead, Concordate ships moved into attack positions. Then, across Coalition space, every screen, every display, every communication device activated simultaneously. The broadcast began. It started with images of draconids helping early human explorers, teaching them to reach the stars. Then the lies, the propaganda, the systematic destruction of an entire species. The extraction programs shown in clinical detail. Testimony from Iris and other defectors. Live footage of Ember and Ash, proof that draconids still lived and suffered. And finally, a message from Elder Sienna herself speaking directly to humanity. We gave you the stars, she said, her voice resonating across billions of screens. We asked only for friendship. You chose fear and greed instead. Now you have a choice. Continue the genocide, continue the lies, and lose access to the technology we shared. Or choose differently. Choose truth. Choose partnership. Choose to be the species you claim to be. The broadcast lasted 17 minutes. In that time, Coalition space erupted into chaos. On the Concordate flagship orbiting Thornhaven, Agent Rourke watched the broadcast with growing horror. His entire career, his life's work exposed for the galaxy to see. He gave the order to attack, to silence the sanctuary before more damage could be done. Lieutenant Harrison, his second in command, refused. I've followed your orders for 5 years, Harrison said quietly. I believed we were serving Coalition security, but I won't be part of genocide. Not anymore. Across the fleet, similar conversations happened. Officers questioning orders, crews demanding answers. The attack never came. Instead, something remarkable happened. On human colony worlds, protests erupted demanding accountability. On Earth itself, crowds gathered outside government buildings chanting for truth and justice. Scientists resigned from research programs. Military officers refused to enforce Concordate directives. The Atheron Concordate, facing the collapse of centuries of carefully constructed lies, began to fracture. Member species demanded investigations. Trade agreements were suspended. The galactic order that had been built on draconid suffering started to crumble. It wasn't universal. Some denied the evidence. Some justified the genocide as necessary. Some argued that the past didn't matter, only the future. But enough people across enough worlds chose to be horrified, chose to demand better. 3 days later, Coalition representatives arrived at Thornhaven, not to attack but to negotiate. They came unarmed, offering talks instead of threats. Elder Sienna met them in the Crystal Gardens with David and Iris at her side. The lead negotiator was an older woman, Admiral Patricia Hoffman, who had commanded Coalition fleets for 30 years. I watched the broadcast, Hoffman said without preamble. I checked the archives myself, found the records that supported what you showed us. I spent 3 decades defending policies that were built on genocide. I can't apologize enough. Apologies are insufficient, Sienna said, but they are a beginning. What do you propose? A new treaty, full recognition of Thornhaven as sovereign territory, an end to all extraction programs, with enforcement mechanisms and inspections. Access to draconid knowledge through partnership, not theft. And reparations, though I don't know how we could ever truly compensate for what was taken. You cannot, Sienna agreed, but you can choose to build something better. The negotiations took weeks. David watched as agreements were drafted, debated, revised. Not everyone was happy. Concordate hardliners attempted a coup. Extractionist corporations fought the new regulations. But slowly, painfully, change began to happen. Rourke was arrested and faced trial for crimes against sentient beings. His extraction program was shut down, the facilities destroyed, the captive draconids freed and brought to Thornhaven. Nina became a public hero, the whistleblower who helped expose the truth. She used her fame to push for stronger protections for all sentient species. Iris chose to stay on Thornhaven, working with draconid healers to help survivors of the extraction program recover. The weight of guilt would never fully leave her, but she found purpose in service. And David faced a choice of his own. 1 year after he found 2 dying dragons in a garbage chute, he stood on a platform overlooking Thornhaven's central gathering space. Thousands of beings had assembled, human and draconid and dozens of other species, all here for the first joint celebration between their peoples. Ember and Ash stood beside him, no longer babies but young adults. Their scales gleamed with health, their wings were strong and beautiful. They had grown into their power, able to navigate luminal space and teach others the skills their ancestors had shared so freely. "You could go home," Ember said, using the psychic voice she had mastered. "Back to human space. You're famous now. You could have anything you wanted." David looked at her, then at Ash, then at the assembled crowd below. Human children played with draconid hatchlings, learning together, growing together. Scientists from a dozen species collaborated on research, sharing knowledge freely. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still distrust, still people on both sides who couldn't let go of old hatreds. But it was better. It was hope. "I am home," David said. He stepped forward to address the crowd. The words came easily, from a heart that had finally healed. "A year ago, I found 2 children dying in the cold. I thought I was saving them. But the truth is, they saved me. They saved all of us. They showed us that being human isn't about what we've done. It's about what we choose to do next." He looked at the humans in the crowd, at the faces reflecting shame and determination and hope. "We built our civilization on genocide. We profited from suffering. We told ourselves comfortable lies rather than face uncomfortable truths. That is our legacy. We cannot erase it. We cannot make it right, but we can choose what comes next." David gestured toward Ember and Ash, toward the young draconids flying overhead. "I choose hope. I choose to believe we can be better. I choose partnership over exploitation. I choose truth over comfort. I choose family." The crowd was silent for a moment. Then slowly applause began, not just from humans but from every species present. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was simply acknowledgement that change was possible. As the celebration began, David felt Ember and Ash's presence in his mind, warm and accepting and permanent. They showed him a vision of the future they were building together. Schools where human and draconid children learned side by side. Ships crewed by mixed species exploring the galaxy as partners. Knowledge shared freely, no more secrets, no more exploitation. It would take generations to heal the wounds. Some damage could never be repaired. But they were trying, and that had to mean something. That night, as fireworks filled the sky above Thornhaven, colors and patterns created by both human technology and draconid psychic abilities intertwining in beauty, David stood with his family and watched the stars. Ember and Ash took flight, their voices resonating with everyone present through the psychic network that connected all draconids. "You are not defined by your past," they said. "You are defined by your choices, and today you chose love." David watched them soar, tears streaming down his face. Tears for what was lost and tears for what might still be saved. In his quarters, the photograph of his late wife still held a place of honor on his desk. Next to it sat a new photograph taken that morning. David with Ember and Ash, surrounded by friends both human and draconid, a family built not by blood but by choice. Humanity had found something among the stars after all. Not conquest, not wealth, not power. Something more valuable and harder to achieve. The chance to be better than they were. The chance to choose compassion over convenience. The chance to love rather than fear. And in the end, that was enough.